Hey Dylan, can you hear me?
Hi, how's it going?
Pretty good, dude. How about you?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. I'm just, just reading these developments just going live. There's more updates coming in constantly, so I'm trying to do my best to keep track.
That's gotta be overwhelming as hell. Like, I was just talking to my chat about how you almost died in Ukraine. I don't wanna get to that point too quickly because I feel like there's a lot you want to talk up leading up to that. But we're lucky to have you here right now, and I'm just glad to say that you're okay.
Thank you. I like not being dead. It's nice.
Yeah. That video that you showed on stream, I stuck around very briefly to watch your going over the Twitter videos you posted,
Hmm.
and that experience is horrifying. That experience seems horrifying, and I'm glad you're okay, man.
Yeah, I mean, this one was a little different than the other experiences I had because the first experience I had that was somewhat like that, it was on the front line. We had a vague idea we were being targeted, but no explosions happened close to us because we were just being chased by a Russian drone, and it was a spotter drone, but they never actually got to shelling us, or they did shell, but they shelled the area we left. So we were in danger, but we thought maybe a suicide drone, but it was a very different type of danger because it was kind of just in the general purview. It wasn't on you. You're not hearing it. You're not being attacked. You have the fear of being attacked. Where the second time I had an experience like this, it was in Mykolaiv, where they were just shelling the entirety of the city. So you had to, you knew you could get hurt, but you also didn't feel like you were being targeted. Whereas in this experience, I knew I was being targeted. We knew we were being targeted by the Russian military. And it was very, very clear. I first found it out because I heard the whistle I found out we were being shelled because I heard the whistle. I heard it coming close because I could hear that very distinct kind of whistling sound of an incoming artillery shell, mortar shell. And you can only hear it when it's right above your head. And so when I heard that, that's when I knew it was happening and I got down. I'm rambling about it, but I don't know what to say about it
No,
because, I don't know how to talk about it with
no,
people.
absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously. I feel like it's one of those things where it's God. I wish that hadn't happened because, that was close. But at the same time, I feel as though I would feel somewhat vindicated. I know you've been dealing with people who've been carrying water for Russia and the war crimes they're committing for a while now, and to be able to witness firsthand and catch on video, and be able to say, no, I've seen it. Not necessarily cathartic, but reassuring that you're advocating for the right side of things.
Um, I don't know if it was very like much reassuring, and I don't know if I had much vindication because you don't need to be here long to get an idea of the type of like terror campaigns or like war crimes that are going on a very constant basis. The only thing that was particularly special about the war crime that we recently documented in Kherson was that we got everything on camera. We got the aid workers loading up the boat. And for those of you who don't know, I was in Kherson recently. I got back, I think 2 weeks ago now. I'm preparing to head out again maybe in a week to go somewhere else to film. But 2 weeks ago, I got back from Kherson, and I was in Kherson because I was going to be filming with animal rescue crews who were, saving animals that have been stranded by the flooding. A lot of families had to leave their pets behind, and that's not always the first consideration when, the flooding starts. And since most of the human evacuations had already been done, they were trying to see if there's any animals that could be helped. And so we went out onto the water with a boat that ended up not even working. It started to break down, but as we were about to go back to pick up the boat with the German aid workers that I was filming with, we then got shelled by the Russian military. It was actually a private military company connected to the 205th. It was a private military company headed by the head of the Russian occupation authority in Crimea. They posted video of it afterwards, bragging about it, saying that we were like Ukrainian special forces operators that were going to create a bridgehead on the other side of the Dnieper River in order to, spearhead the Ukrainian counteroffensive and, attack them. But there's no footage that shows any like soldiers or any military personnel that they've posted. They have yet to show any evidence of that. And all they ended up accomplishing was injuring a friend of mine by the name of John Jones, who had a piece of shrapnel enter his upper thigh and his lower abdomen. The only reason he probably wasn't killed was because his pelvis ended up deflecting the shrapnel. He's an elderly man, an elderly British expat, so he's very, very lucky to be alive. And he also didn't wear his body armor, and so he's even more lucky to be alive. He should have been wearing his body armor.
That is horrific. And the audacity, too. The audacity to say, oh, yeah, these press were, they were Ukrainian special forces trying to, like, smooth it over and push the lies already. The amount of dishonesty, the provable, witnessable, like, dishonesty on the side of those carrying water for Russia is pretty infuriating. Particularly, I assume you've got a lot more examples than I could come to mind with. But there was the Bucha massacre, where satellite camera footage was able to show that after the Russians came through that area, there's just bodies lining the street who had been clearly handcuffed and executed, or zip tied behind their back and executed point blank and there was also a ton of other horrible shit, I think, that was reported, like a lot of young women reported being sexually assaulted by Russian soldiers. Just the most horrific stuff. And then Russian media outlets come back with, no, that was Ukraine. False flag. It's like the audacity.
I've talked to people who were involved in some of the first. I interviewed people who were involved in some of the first clearing of that area of Bucha and the surrounding suburbs. Bucha is just the name of one suburb. There was multiple suburbs that had to deal with this type of Russian operation, full of extrajudicial killings, rounding people up, people associated with the government, people of any vaguely Ukrainian nationalist imagery, just military age men a lot of times as well. People could just be just in the wrong place at the wrong time, riding your bike. There was footage of people riding their bike being shot in the back as they're just riding it through the street. They uncovered a lot of war crimes, and it really heavily affected a lot of the people who saw it on the ground. I mean, it was already extremely emotional, just seeing it on camera. It was extremely horrific, the type of stuff that was uncovered. But that's just one area that it happened in. It also happened in Irpin. It also happened in a lot of the area in the Ukrainian countryside. It was part of the reason why the Territorial Defense Forces, which were a lot of locals and basically the Ukrainian version of the National Guard, but it's a little bit more ragtag. The reason they fought so hard was because these stories started to come out. Even though Bucha and Izium and these areas were actually where people went to hide from the Russians, because they expected the fighting to be in the city center of Kiev, not in the suburbs surrounding it. So that's also the thing that was so horrific about Bucha, is it was supposed to be a safe haven, but it wasn't. People judged very, very wrongly about how far the Russians were going to get, and they kind of took out their frustrations on their military failures on the local civilian population. I interviewed some people who were in Bucha during the occupation. All the stories are terrible. A lot of the stuff that witnesses saw, and this is always true with war crimes, isn't going to be officially filed because there's not overwhelming evidence. Not everybody has a phone in their hand when a war crime happens. Not everybody has multiple witnesses or lawyers on present to document everything that happens perfectly. And definitely when you're talking about a lot of these older babushkas who don't, have a camera phone, maybe they have a flip phone if they have a phone. You just get a lot of testimony, which I wanted to record. I wanted to see if I could get some testimony of what the locals had seen, even if the evidence isn't super overwhelming. Because the truth of the matter is, most of the war crimes that are happening in Ukraine are not being documented. There's just not even though it's getting more documented than usual when these types of atrocities happen, because we're in the 21st century, we're in the age of the internet, everybody has a camera in their pocket. Most of them I still don't believe are being documented.
That's the scary thing, is that every other day it feels like the headlines have another horrible massacre that's been committed by Russian soldiers or some private military contracting group that's working with Russia, that they've done some horrific war crime. Or, there's evidence, right? We know they did it, but they can't outright report that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. so much of it never is going to be heard of by the mainstream media, by the vast majority of people outside of Ukraine. Even in certain areas of Ukraine, the story might not get out because a lot of communication, I imagine, has been cut for a variety of reasons. But gosh, I'm impressed that you're going back. I'm impressed, and I have a lot of respect that you're going back, especially after that near-death experience. Mad respect.
Well, I'm not going back to Kherson specifically. I'm going to be going to a different part of the country to film with artillery crews
Still,
who are very
still though.
they are very busy right now, the artillery crews. This is most certainly has been a war of artillery. Artillery has been one of the heavy deciding factors in this war. And so I wanted to see what their daily lives are like, what they actually have to deal with on the daily, because a lot of the way it's presented in, government footage and it's talked about online, I don't necessarily believe it might be 100% accurate. So I want to see what it's, really like from a human perspective. So I'm going to go try to interview them on the ground, talk about their daily experiences, their difficulties, stuff like that.
Yeah, I've got a million questions, and I imagine there's a million things you want to talk about because especially the last week, news has been heavy. A lot of breakneck news coming out of Russia and Ukraine.
I know. Honestly, it's like it's hard to stream this week. I took a breather yesterday. I had to work on some other stuff. I have so many projects in the works. I got so many just stuff just sitting on the back burner. I'm so not only am I busy with it, but I'm just like tired. There's just so much to talk about. There's so many developing stories, which I guess is, on one hand it's good for me, but god damn, I feel like I'm being whipped.
It's emotionally exhausting, like people think, oh, a lot of stuff is happening, a lot of bad stuff's happening. That's good for the people who cover it financially, but it's also just grim. It's not fun that this is happening. It's just kind of, it's not kind of, it's just overtly sad and infuriating. I feel like a good place to start with, though, because I imagine some people might be a little bit behind. I don't know how many people keep up with all the details of what's been happening, but do you want to summarize like the beginning of the war, just the important points, like whatever you think is the most important to bring up, and the more recent events with like what you've seen and done in Ukraine and the Wagner coup stuff? I think that would be a good order to do it, but it's up to you.
Sure. There's when you talk about the beginning of the war, it's a little complicated. So I'll just summarize it to the best of my ability. In 2014, there was a Ukrainian president who was by the name of Yanukovych, who tried to pull out of a trade association agreement with the European Union, which was very, 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 very unpopular. So people then protested against this because he said on the campaign trail he was going to do it. And there was good reason to believe that he had been pressured by the Russian government very severely, possibly also using economic coercion in order to try to make him cave and instead try to enter their economic agreements instead of entering the ones with the European Union, which the majority of the people supported, he had campaigned on, and would allow things like visa-free travel that would be very beneficial for Ukrainians. So this was done in the middle of the night. And even though it was done in the middle of the night, most likely to stunt a reaction from the public, people went onto the street to protest against it. There was then a brutal crackdown. The people responded very negatively to that, and then Yanukovych fled. After Yanukovych fled, the government in Russia then decided that they were going to invade Crimea, take advantage of the chaos and political uncertainty, which maybe could progress in a way that's unfriendly to their quote-unquote strategic interests. They invade Crimea. They then also funnel weapons and money and also like Russian soldiers into the Donbass, contractors like in the Wagner Group, which a lot of people talk about the Wagner Group kind of starting and cutting its teeth in this early time period. And in the last 8 years, that has largely been a frozen conflict, the funding of the separatism and the invasion of Crimea. But in 2022, the Russians got a bunch of soldiers on the border, said they weren't going to invade. Before then, they finally invaded again in order to overthrow the Ukrainian government and secure their economic interests, their strategic interests. These are going to be all the reasons, like like there's a man, it's such a, why did the war start? I think it started in part because they wanted access to, you know, the bases in Crimea. I think it's partially because they wanted access to Ukrainian resources, but I also think that it's because of the ultranationalism of the Russian regime, which views Ukraine as kind of like a pseudo nation, not a real nation state. That the Ukrainian identity is a kind of weird mutation of the Russian identity. It's an offshoot of the Russian identity. They're little Russians, and it was an artificial state created by Lenin. And if it does not exist as a friendly entity in relation to Russia that serves Russian interests, then the Russians have the right to take away that sovereignty. They have a right to take away the identity. The Russians will also bring up other reasons for the war starting, like NATO expansion. While it is debatable that it played a role, I don't think it was a very large role due to the fact that NATO was not going to be expanding into Ukraine in 2022, 2023, or 2024, or any time in the near future. The Russians had already stopped that. So there had to be other motivating factors, in my view. As for what is happening recently, after the Russians invaded, they kind of face planted. They said, oops, dropped my invasion everywhere, all disaster. What am I going to do? And Wagner's answer to this, the private military company, which was usually known for its mercenary work across Africa, where it would, defend many brutal regimes across the region in return for getting resource rights. For example, if it took back a oil and gas facility in Syria, it would get 25% of the oil and gas facility profits from that facility. And in the Central African Republic, it has ownership through a bunch of shell companies, of course. I think the one in the Central African Republic would be Concord. They also get paid in a lot of mining rights and access to like gold and, rich minerals that they can profit off of. And it cut its teeth in Africa. It's cut its teeth in Syria, defending the Assad regime. And in Ukraine, it got bloated. It got a lot of, prisoners, and it got more powerful. But after it got so powerful, other people in Russia's government, notably Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, and Gerasimov, who is the head of the Russian general staff, the military general staff, they're not very happy with it. They're part of the Siloviki, an old security guard, it's not security state, but part of the Russian establishment, the security establishment, and they didn't like how powerful and independent Wagner, this private military company, was becoming. And so they cut off prison recruitment. Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, who used to be a caterer for Vladimir Putin, he's the person who heads the Wagner Group. He also used to be a street thug, and he served time in prison for it, and a hot dog salesman. So he's had a very diverse life. He was trying to fight back against Wagner, his group being boxed in on, but every single time he got boxed in more and more. There wasn't really much he could do in response. He released a lot of messaging against Shoigu and Gerasimov. Most Russians think Shoigu and Gerasimov did mess up the war, that they haven't actually been managing it quite well. So he capitalized on that. But all of that was still not enough to avoid what Putin eventually allowed Shoigu and Gerasimov to do, which was these new contract negotiations, which I think is the real starting point for the coup. What these contract negotiations said was basically that everybody with Wagner was going to have to sign an MOD contract. That would mean that the Russian Ministry of Defense would have more control over Wagner and more direct control over all of these mercenaries, instead of them being as independent as they were. And so Prigozhin, around this time, it is believed he started to plot, he started to plan his, I guess you could call it mutiny. I think mutiny is the most correct word. We use the word coup, but since it wasn't technically an attempt to remove Vladimir Putin from power, at least we don't think it was technically an attempt to remove Vladimir Putin from power. I think mutiny would probably be more accurate, but I think coup is not that far off either, since he was still trying to, according to new reports, literally kidnap Sergei Shoigu and Gerasimov, hold them hostage until he got everything he wanted, which was Wagner not being dissolved. This is according to his own words, which was, them fixing this mismanagement of the war, and also him saving his own ass, because once you lose favor in Russian politics, sometimes you tend to go out of windows. And so he tried to do a coup. Most people kind of know the story from here. They marched on Rostov, which is the headquarters of the Russian military command in Ukraine. It is also a major logistical hub into Donetsk and Luhansk for the Russian occupation. They then tried to march on Moscow. Vladimir Putin said, "Come on, man, that's not very nice." He didn't care. He kept marching the whole time, saying that the war was based on lies. This is all nonsense. This is all bullshit. Before eventually turning around right outside of Moscow because of a deal proposed by Lukashenko. And that's most of the basic information. There's a ton of other information, but I already talked quite a lot. There's just so much information.
No, I really enjoy hearing about it because, like, I've been keeping up with things, but you're way more tapped in than I am. So it's nice to hear about this because I'm pretty invested. In like I want Ukraine to remain a independent sovereign state, and I want it to remain its people to remain like safe. I don't want them to be under threat of getting shelled by artillery from the Russians. I don't want them to be in fear of artillery units moving in to their neighborhoods that they're trying to like hide out in to avoid the fighting, and slaughtering every military-aged male that they can find, and like sexually assaulting families and children. It's horrific. Like I've heard a lot about like the things that Russian soldiers will do in some of these towns, and it is very upsetting.
Well, the thing is, the thing that's interesting about this story, and I always found this part particularly interesting, is Wagner is known for its brutality, and it loves that reputation. It bathes in the reputation of its brutality. People think like a lot of people have heard about the fact that they execute their own soldiers with sledgehammers, that they will then upload these videos online in order to send a message to their other soldiers that if you disobey orders, if you don't attack when we tell you to attack, if you, as a prisoner from one of these prisons, you said, okay, yeah, I'll go to Ukraine, you come to Ukraine, you're like, oh, I have second thoughts. Prigozhin made it very clear from the get-go, you will be executed. They will consider that treason and execute you in the field, and they will publicize your execution if it suits their propaganda purposes. But this is not new. They actually were known for executing people way before this with sledgehammers. In 2015, they executed a Syrian man who was forcefully drafted into the Syrian military. He did not want to fight for Assad's regime, and once they found out that he wasn't going to fight, they beat him to death with sledgehammers, recorded it, and it was then posted online. His brother actually gave really good testimony for a recent Wall Street Journal documentary on the Wagner Group and the history of the Wagner Group. I'd recommend people go watch that. It was actually released 2 weeks before the Wagner coup. But Wagner has built this reputation. There's also been pictures of them, with like Ukrainian heads on sticks, and stories of rape and extrajudicial killings and murders and a lot of terrible stuff. Which, but it's also a strange dynamic, because sometimes you'll get instances where a Wagner guy will go and will commit some atrocity like a rape, and then they'll punish him brutally because he's some prisoner soldier, and they're gonna, they're gonna make sure these guys, follow some sort of discipline. But they also don't really care if these soldiers brutalize the local population that much. They get away with it quite a lot. There's a lot of evidence of that. And so they've built up a reputation. And so now this dangerous mercenary army made up of a lot of rapists and criminals from prison, who a lot of times will come back from these deployments after being let go from Wagner, and then rape and murder back in their hometowns and get arrested again, put back in prison. But hey, I guess another Wagner deployment is all they need. But this army of rapists and murderers that was armed by the Russian government, that everybody knows is a bunch of rapists and murderers who executes people with sledgehammers if they don't follow orders, marches across the border, and you're like a Russian street cop, and you're supposed to stop them. You're part of the Russian National Guard, and you're supposed to stop their tanks. You're supposed to stop these guys that are shooting down helicopters and command planes on their way to Moscow. It's your job to stop them. Yeah, a lot of them stepped out of the way. No, I don't want to be tortured to death by a bunch of Russian street gangs that were given machine guns and have a bunch of sledgehammers, and they want to go to work. It wasn't that surprising. A lot of them, stood out of the way.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, at that point, it's, yeah, with the reputation they have, it's almost like a mob. It's more like the mob than a military unit. It's an organized
it's designed that way.
Gang.
It is actually designed that way on purpose. When Prigozhin was talking to these prisoners, there is prison culture in Russia that is extremely brutal. There's like this culture of like untouchables, these types of people that if you're like one of the like regular prisoners or part of a different class of prisoners, you're not supposed to touch. And he was like, let me be clear, you will not serve with these types of people. You will not serve with the homosexuals. You will not serve with these types of other people that were deemed untouchables for any number of reasons. We will respect your prison culture traditions. They were saying that during the recruitment period while trying to get these people from prisons into Wagner, while the Russian MOD was a lot less accommodating for that. It was part of the reason why I think Wagner's prison recruitment was maybe somewhat more successful than the MOD's prison recruitment. But yeah, no, they were explicit. Like, we will keep the brutal culture of your prison within our military unit, and we will let you serve with your fellow prisoners, respecting that prison culture.
Oh. Yeah, that's not a good recipe for. That's not a recipe for anything good to come out of that. That it's awful what they've been doing in Ukraine, but more recently, I guess they mobilized into Russia. I'm curious how much of an effect this has had on the front lines in Ukraine. I feel like there being so much turmoil back home would make like the already pretty low morale by the looks of things, Russian forces pretty scattered, a little bit like aimless.
So far, we don't have any like confirmed direct impact on the front line, because the supplies to the front line were not disturbed for long enough for there to be a supply impact. They didn't take enough troops back from Ukraine for it to, they're pulling people out in order to deal with it. They did pull out Chechens from occupied Mariupol, but Mariupol is currently not the front line. It can be bombed, it can still be attacked, but it is currently not the front line. So in those aspects, it hasn't had a direct impact on the front line yet. I'm sure that it's probably on the mind of many Russian soldiers, and it's probably having morale impact. It's kind of hard for you to fight an army that's trying to remove you from your trench, that's in brutal hand-to-hand combat sometimes, and close trench-to-trench, nose-to-nose combat, when you don't have a rear, when you've just found out that it doesn't take much for somebody to march on your nation's capital. Your nation doesn't have a flank, that your nation is essentially stretched thin. Now, maybe not everybody realizes that this kind of explodes Russia as not really having much of a flank, and that the National Guard, the Rosguardia, who the head of the Rosguardia, I believe his name's not Victor Bout. I forget what his name is, but it's Victor something. He's getting rewarded for staying loyal to Putin, but the National Guard couldn't stop. The National Guard, the Rosguardia, their version of our National Guard, couldn't stop Wagner. And so I think that is going to be a concern for Russian soldiers. The fact that they're already stretched so thin and they didn't have reserves to stop Wagner. That they resorted to digging holes in the road as they're on the way to Moscow in order to try to slow down Wagner. I also think that there is an element of, if your central government isn't stable or doesn't feel stable, how do you know you're going to continue to be supported? How do you know that you've got a secure command behind you? So I think there's like a psychological impact that's probably the only real direct immediate impact is having in Ukraine. But I think long term, that's where we're going to see the impact when it comes to this. It's going to be Russian oligarchs never before thinking about a post-Putin Russia, now starting to think about a post-Putin Russia. The soft Siloviki, which is not super happy about this war, in opposition to the hard Siloviki, which thinks they need to like crack down harder on this war, that needs to close the borders, be a lot more aggressive. They're going to start making contingency plans. They're going to start thinking about, well, actually, maybe we can get a way out of this war. I mean, it seems like Putin was pretty easily challenged, and the person who challenged him seem to live to talk another day. Maybe we can challenge them. And so not only are they going to be making contingency plans, but they're going to start making plans of operation themselves. I also think that it's going to be very difficult for a lot of Russia's allies to not start considering option B, option C, option D, overseas allies, overseas alliance structures. If you're Armenia right now, knowing that Russia is your main security guarantee against a more aggressive and nationalistic Azerbaijan, which wants to violate your territorial integrity, well, Maybe you should start talking to Anthony Blinken a little more. Maybe you should be talking to the Biden administration a little more. Maybe you should be talking to your other allies more. What if Russia suffers another security crisis? What's the message that's been sent here? Can they deal with another security crisis? So say you're a revolutionary in Kazakhstan who had your protest movement cracked down upon about 2 years ago now. Last time it had to be put down by Russian soldiers. Can Russian soldiers now be deployed? Is it going to be anything different than riot police? Maybe if you've got, some more heavy machinery, maybe you could stop just some Rosguardian National Guard troops who got shredded and torn apart in Ukraine. These are all questions that are going to be starting to be asked about Russia's allies and adversaries, about how strong is the Russian government, because the cracks look like they're starting to show. This is something that's going to have an effect on the amount of leverage Russia has when it comes to this war, because there's no way you have a military style push, you have like a beer hall push, you have a mutiny that goes all the way to your nation's capital, and then you come to the negotiating table and think that you're in the same position that you were in before. It's just impossible.
I feel like a lot of Putin's mythologized toughness has dissolved because of this. I feel like, especially here in America, I'm hearing a lot more people being like, yeah, Putin kind of bitched out. And I think you're definitely right about that. I'm actually curious about your opinion on, long term. Do you think that the Russian oligarchy might end up overthrowing Putin, putting someone else in place? Could there be an entire overhaul of the way that Russia is run? Could we see that in our lifetimes?
I mean, people have been thinking about a post-Putin Russia for quite a while now, and Putin's he's just past 70, so he is getting up there in age, but he's also in a position where he could realistically live and rule for another 10 years, right? I mean, look how long it took for Robert Mugabe to actually be pushed out of office. So I think this is the weakest Putin has ever looked for the entirety of his administration since probably the start of the millennia. Maybe you could say a brief period during Chechnya, but besides that, this is the weakest Putin has ever looked. And so the idea of a post-Russia Putin, a Russia without Putin, and the fact that people now not only hype up the idea of, well, maybe one day we could challenge Putin, or imagine challenging Putin. People saw Putin directly get challenged, even though the challenge was more to Sergei Shoigu and Surovikin. And that's the thing that's so ironic about this, is that by allowing this situation to get out of control so that Prigozhin could challenge Shoigu and Gerasimov, which is assumedly the situation that happened, even though we, of course, don't have all the information. Even if it wasn't a direct challenge to Putin, or the intention was not to remove Putin, it's still removed from his authority, because the fact that he didn't endorse it, and it happened anyway, and then he said no, and then he kept going, and then when it was all over, the person who told him no is now on vacation in Belarus, possibly still able to operate a now somewhat neutered Wagner Group to maybe still get mineral rights in Africa, still get oil pipeline, oil deals in Syria, still get gold mines in the Central African Republic, still do deals with the Rapid Support Forces and Khalifa Haftar in Libya, still raking in that money. There are journalists right now calling Wagner recruitment centers all across Russia, and they're still recruiting. They are still recruiting people. Now, whether those people are going to be able to go to Belarus like Putin said that they will be able to go, I don't know. But right now, Putin looks weak. And that's why it seems that I think he started basically a purge, where he is now purging anybody who was simply somewhat sympathetic to Wagner. He's purging people who are not extremely, I would say, I don't know if the word's Putin loyalists, but people who maybe stood aside when everything was going on, people who stood down there. He's trying to remove them. And the most high profile example of this is General Armageddon. Surovikin. He is somebody who cut his teeth in Chechnya, cut his teeth in Syria. He was in charge of the Russian air campaign in Syria, which was basically, is that a hospital? Not anymore. He leveled that country, and then he was in charge of the Russian war in Ukraine for a while. He even managed the withdrawal of Russian forces from Kherson when they were retreating from the city of Kherson across the river. And he was in the running to be probably like one of the top 3 defense officials in the whole country. It was him, Shoigu, and Gerasimov. And many people would say that right now he might have been favored. But it's been revealed, I think 30 or 40 minutes ago by CNN. And so now this is starting to paint the picture around Surovikin, where he was releasing this kind of weird message in the middle of the night at the start of the coup with him holding a gun saying, "Stand down, Wagner, stand down." And he looked kind of intoxicated, and I was confused about it at the time. But now we're finding out that he's been detained, that he's been arrested, and he might have been a secret Wagner VIP member the entire time due to documents obtained by CNN 30 minutes ago, which is unbelievably juicy information. I'm shocked by that. I think a lot of people are going to be shocked by that. We all knew that Surovikin and Prigozhin had a cozy relationship, but I don't think anybody thought it was potentially this cozy.
Damn. Okay, so that's pretty scandalous. I'm really curious because the Russian propaganda outlets, you know, your Russia Today's and your figures who are very clearly just shills for Russia, like the tanky types. I'm really curious because I know you've argued with these people, you've dealt with their bullshit. How has this affected their propaganda? Is there a schism? Are they all like Putin loyalists, or are they siding with Wagner? Is there a schism?
It's very strange because on one hand, when I was looking at Russian Telegram, they're all infighting like crazy. There's people who are like, the only problem with this is that Prigozhin didn't go too far, or Prigozhin's a traitor, he's going to make us lose the war. I mean, there's opinions everywhere. All you need to do is look at the reaction to Prigozhin's second Telegram speech when he finally like announced he was calling this whole thing off of the deal with Lukashenko, and look at the difference between the reaction when he announced he was doing the coup, he was doing this military mutiny, and when he called it off. There is a diversity of opinion, at least online. Now, of course, Telegram messages, I mean, it would be like looking at Twitter to try to gauge American public opinion. You could immediately see what the problems would be with that, because Twitter is Twitter and Telegram is Telegram. Okay, it's just it's not that different when it comes to the toxicity than Twitter, but still it shows that there are a lot of people who disagree about this right now. When you go to the more English speaking, like Russian propaganda sphere, it's much stranger, because it's either, I'm seeing a lot of people who loved Prigozhin pretending that he doesn't exist anymore and they're just trying to move on. I saw a lot of people who praise Surovikin as somebody who, like, the slaughterer of terrorists in Syria, and he was such a hero defending Assad, who are now pretending he doesn't exist, or just completely trying to ignore the situation as if they never knew who this person was. But the strangest reaction is the conspiracy theories. For example, I was on a panel recently with somebody by the name of Non-Smoker. Now, Non-Smoker is not a very popular person, like when it comes to like commentary or anything. So I don't know if he's the best example, but other people have said a similar theory. The idea, I think Jackson Hinkle has it, a few other has, that this whole thing was very suspect, and it maybe was a ploy to move Wagner into Belarus so they can make another march on Kiev. Not only does that not make sense, is it too costly to the image of the Kremlin? Why would they have to kill their own airmen and have planes shot down to do it, where now Putin looks weak because he can't, you know, defend the airmen that got killed. He's not bringing anybody who killed those airmen to justice. But it also probably wouldn't work. Like 35,000 Wagner mercenaries are not enough to take Kiev. Not enough nearly. Definitely since the flooding in Kiev due to like the beaver dams never being deconstructed because all the civilians left, and the mines that have been placed then, and the fortifications that have been built then. It doesn't make any sense. So people are either coping, or they're just pretending it's not happening, or that it's not a big deal. The people who are pretending it's not a big deal are the strangest, because like I have this copy pasta I read on a panel recently. I don't know if you're okay with me reading this copy pasta.
No, go ahead.
But it's I think it's a good representation of the problems that Russia is facing. And if anybody wants to say this isn't that big of a deal, I think kind of looking at a different perspective might help. Day 487 of the 3-day special operation to denazify Mexico. Mexico has launched a counteroffensive against U.S.-held Tijuana and is suffering 500 to 1,000 casualties a day. Joe Biden and Mark Milley tried to dissolve the McDonald's private military company, which has become oversized and bloated with penal troops from prisons across the United States. Threaten the McDonald's CEO with treason and death if he does not comply. The McDonald's CEO takes his entire private military company and takes over Austin, Texas and Atlanta, Georgia without resistance on the way to Mark Milley's office. Joe Biden appears on TV, visibly shaking. "Come on, man. Don't fight, man. That's wrong." 7 Apache helicopters shot down in the chaos and a command aircraft is lost. Justin Trudeau mediates a deal with the McDonald's PMC to let them leave to Canada in exchange for not killing Mark Milley. McDonald takes the deal. Poll posters from India and Pakistan applaud Joe Biden's tactical wit and cunning in handling the situation. Another flawless win for the United States.
I love it. I love putting it in the perspective of like America doing the same type of shit. Because these people's politics pretty much begins and ends at America bad, Russia good. So it's a really good meme. I like that one a lot. I'm also curious about feeling a sudden wave of nausea. I hope that passes. Last time I looked at the UA map, the live UA map, and it seems like that's still the case. There is what's the name of this river? You probably know better than I, but the fighting seems to be stopped at this river. And notably, a lot of fighting is happening at the mouth of said river, where I'm pretty certain that is now flooded. But even prior to that, a lot of this area is wetland. It's a delta of a river, and it seems like that geographical barrier is playing a huge part in holding the line right now.
Do you mean the Dnipro River? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've visited the Dnipro River on a few occasions. I filmed at it during the Kherson counteroffensive. At the start of it, 24 hours after it began, I was actually, I think, 3 miles from the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, where we're doing a story, interviewing locals about a possible nuclear disaster and how it could affect their lives. And the river is big. It is not easy to cross, and to do a crossing is an extreme strategic risk. And so most analysts for a while have hypothesized that the Ukrainians were going to launch their counteroffensive in the Zaporozhye direction. Now, that's not the only place that people have hypothesized. Some people say maybe they're going to launch their big counteroffensive near Bakhmut. I don't think that's extremely likely for them to dedicate the majority of their forces for, quite frankly, not that overall an important strategic location, even if it's become extremely symbolically important. The safe bet has always been Zaporozhye, and that seems to be where a lot of the prepping actions, a lot of the probing maneuvers, a lot of the preparatory attacks, where they're trying to take high ground here and take a few villages there in order to get into a good position to eventually smash through the Russian line of defense. That seems to be the Ukrainian plan, is to dedicate these new units, which have been somewhat trained by the West and supplied by the West, but not only the West, by their own domestic trainers as well. They're going to take these new units that have been created and smash them into the Russian defenses there, and hopefully be able to remove the dragon teeth, which are anti-tank traps that the Russians have set up there, anti-tank ditches. They'll be able to cross those if they have good engineers and people who are working with good combined arms warfare, if they're led well and they work together, and able to overcome the strong Russian fortifications. That at least is the hope. But that's not the only place where action is happening right now. A lot of fighting is still going on around Bakhmut, even if the fighting for the city center itself, the urban center, is done, with a lot of territory actually trading hands in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I've been updating the live UA map and coming back to it for the last week or so, and it's crazy how many updates happen every day on here. So, for example, 7 minutes ago, there were explosions reported in Zaporizhia. I'm really bad when it comes to pronouncing the name of these Ukrainian locations, but I do my best. I was also, you mentioned it earlier, and I wish I'd written it down, because that's what I'm going to start doing with combos in the future. You mentioned that you went out with a group of people helping animals in the flooded areas after the power plant was destroyed. And it reminded me a lot of, I grew up in Florida. Hurricanes are a big deal. And a lot of people who, just can't handle the hurricane coming will just leave. Fair enough, right? But they'll leave their pets behind. And a common one that happens, and it's very tragic, and there are a lot of people that go out and they help these animals, is they'll put their pet in a crate on the porch. And, if the water level rises, what'll happen, right? Was that a huge issue? Like, I'm curious about, like, the animal saving efforts.
The main two issues that we ran into, there was three issues really. I think we ran into during the preparatory stages on the day that we went out to film on the water. The first issue was that they were then requiring at that point that we had to have metal boats, and the Germans had to get a metal boat because they actually only had plastic boats on them, like inflatable boats, stuff like that they were using in the more urban environments. So they got a red speedboat. Which we have since found out, and I don't know because we haven't published the big story yet. There's only so much I could say because we're working to make sure all the we get the whole story straight and we present all the evidence in one location. And it was also purchased by Offbeat Research, so I there's only so much I can say until that story is released. But there was a problem with this boat before. We were not told there were problems with the boat's engine starting before, and we ran into those problems again when we actually put it on the water. So that was something I was not very happy with because a lot of the response down there has been somewhat unorganized. Not everybody was expecting this to happen, obviously, and so the response has not been super centralized. There's not like a really good centralized gridding system where like all this area has been cleared, as we can see on the map, so you just got to go here and here and here. A lot of it is done by word of mouth and in like group chats and stuff like that. And that was one of the problems that we ran into, was the fact that the boat they ended up giving us to actually use, that they didn't even turn on. The engine didn't work. But the first issue was the debris from popping plastic boats, so we had to have a metal boat. The other issue was mines, because a lot of mines had been displaced by the water, and so mines could just straight up be floating down the river, hit your boat, and then it kills you. And I filmed for a month with the miners in the Kharkiv Oblast. I lived with them and filmed with them for a month. I actually went on Polish TV yesterday to talk about that, but so I knew that was a legitimate risk. And I have seen photographs and videos of these mines being displaced, and many of them are probably going to end up way down the river in Odessa, not just in the area that we were filming in. And the last big security risk, and this was the thing that I think most people were mainly afraid of, was Russian attacks. Russian missile attacks, Russian shelling attacks, Russian mortar attacks. And that was what we actually ended up engaging with that day, because when we went out on the water, our German aid group and a friend of mine by the name of John Jones, they got shelled by the Russian military while they were on the water bank, and they were coming back because the engine didn't work, and they were, gonna pack up for the day.
Yeah, God, it's and it's people going out to save animals. Like they shelled people going out to save animals from a flooded town. It's pretty disgusting. Yeah. Oh, is there anything in particular that you wanted to bring up? Because right now I'm drawing a blank. But is there anything in particular that you feel is important to touch on?
I guess like the only thing I want to touch on is that the evidence in this case is very much overwhelming. We're going to try to be filing it with some legal bodies. We're going to try to file it with the Ukrainian government and try to file it a few other locations, and we're going to clearly list out all the evidence. We've been making sure to abide by all the guidelines while interviewing people. I make sure not to be the ones interviewing people afterwards, having other people interview people, because victims can interview victims, and we're trying to do this the right way. But even though this is one of the cases where we probably have the most overwhelming evidence of this instance, this is not the first time that the Russians have shelled rescue teams. I know that the chief rabbi of Ukraine, when he was doing rescue efforts in Kherson, he was shelled. I knew another person down there by the name of Vianek. He was injured twice during rescue efforts, once by Russian shelling. Took photographs on him. I posted that on Instagram and Twitter. He got hurt by Russian shelling as well. This has become a pretty common occurrence. Some people have actually died in these Russian shelling attacks on rescue operations, a few of which had actually crossed the river in order to pick up, even though we hadn't, had actually crossed the river in order to pick up civilians who are stranded on the Russian side of the river, who have not gotten really any support from the Russian occupation authorities.
Oh yeah. That reminds me a little bit. There was one more thing I wanted to bring up that comes to mind, and it's somewhat related. There's been a couple viral videos like this, but there was one that came out in particular recently of a Russian soldier who tries to leave the. It's been a bit since I watched. I think it was a trench where he wants to turn himself into the Ukrainian army and surrender, and he starts walking like out into the into no man's land across it, and his old friends behind him, his former comrades start shooting at him while a Ukrainian drone directs him how to get to safety.
Yeah, I posted that video on Twitter. It's really it was a really amazing video. I was really touched by the humanity of it and the journey that person went on that we watched, because many people who surrender have to go on that journey where you basically have to walk into the enemy lines after being told that the enemy will they're a bunch of like Nazi murderers who are gonna like kill you and execute you, and you've got to like be like, you know what, my commanding officer, whoever, they're lying to me, it's not worth it, I don't want to die here, I'm going to walk into the Ukrainian lines after raising up my hands, and also in many instances when you look at these videos, taking off your body armor because you could have a grenade or something stuck in there, so you're literally going in to these lines bare to surrender with no protection. So it takes an unbelievable amount of trust, but lucky for that guy, he gave that trust to the Ukrainians, and he got lucky. He got very lucky. It's an incredible video, very touching.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. And then there's the one from this was back when the war first started. The video of the guy who had surrendered and was able to record a video for his family to say, "Hey, I'm okay. The Russians are lying. We're told we're going to be heroes when we got here and we'd be welcomed with parades, but no, they don't want us here. It's all lies." And that was a good one too.
Yeah, what's interesting is that I don't really pay much attention to like POW videos and what they say, because no matter what, it's impossible to 100% trust what a POW is saying in any circumstance.
That's true, yeah.
Because you never truly know the conditions that they're living with unless you've checked them yourselves. And even then you would need to make sure you're not being given like some guided like whatever tour. But yeah, I don't really pay much attention to it. But what was really interesting, and this brings it back to the Wagner coup, is if you listened to what Yevgeny Prigozhin was saying in the lead up, and as this criticism escalated more and more and more against the Russian Ministry of Defense, during the Wagner coup, the actual military push, the mutiny, he peaked in his criticisms by finally saying this war is based on lies. This entire war was based on lies. We're losing 1,000 people a day. The command has no clue what they're doing. They don't have a plan. And it was wild that we saw that type of critique from somebody who was Putin's personal caterer and in charge of one of the most powerful military organizations in Russia and the Russian armed forces. And it also shows that people in the Russian elite 100% know what's going on. I mean, a lot of them know what's going on. Most of them know what's going on. Maybe if Putin's shielded personally, he doesn't truly know what's going on, but a lot of them know the truth of it. But they have to do their best to hide that truth, because if everybody heard that truth and started to believe that truth, it'd be very difficult to keep convincing them to send their kids to go die.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about the POW videos, and that is a good point. But I mean, yeah, there's just so much. The fact that Prigozhin himself came out and just said, "No, it's all bullshit." Like all the justifications that the state media is telling you for why we're doing this war, it's all bullshit. I think probably the biggest reason, like you mentioned before, is nationalism. The idea that Ukraine is, rightfully part of Russia, that should be like Kiev, Russia, or whatever they call it. The Russian nationalists do. So that's a big part of it. But I think for a lot of this, the fact that you have somebody who was seen as this hero of Russia fighting against the Ukrainian Nazi frauds or whatever. He's now letting the cat out of the bag to the Russian people. That puts the Russian state, obviously Putin is in a pretty fucked situation. The oligarchs know that he is not as strong as he fronts, and he doesn't have as much support as he once did. He looks really weak. And not only that, but I think Russia looks pretty weak right now. In the grand scheme of things, this is probably the weakest Russia has looked in a long time. Would you agree?
I think this is the weakest that Putin's regime has ever looked, ever. I don't think there's ever been a time where his regime has looked this weak before. If something like this was to happen in the United States, we'd be hearing nonstop about how the West is collapsing. We're reaching towards the end. This is like our version of the beer hall push, late stage Weimar Germany. But when it happens in Russia, obviously the Russian government is making a good effort to make sure that we don't have that type of a dialogue. But imagine having this happen in your own backyard. How would you feel? That's how a lot of Russians are feeling right now. Completely unsure of their future, unsure about the stability of their government, unsure about who comes after Putin. And that's the thing that I think scares a lot of people is if Putin goes away, nobody knows who's going to replace him, right? People talk about like, oh, well, isn't it the vice president's job? But that's just not how the system works. This is not how the system works here. It's so there's a lot of Russians who are now starting to have that brutal conversation of post-Putin Russia. And that is the long-term damage that Putin can't undo. It is the mentality that has changed, the mentality about the future of the country and what people and how people don't, maybe they respect his regime, but they don't see it as infallible anymore.
Yeah, it's I think it's going to shake the future of what's going to go down in this area of the world pretty significantly. The fact that somebody like this is such a hard situation to deal with from Putin's perspective, and you've got I've seen a little bit of like Russia Today's attempts to try to smooth this over. Mm-hmm. The idea that like, oh, actually Prigozhin and the Wagner group, they're actually just they're crazy. They aren't trustworthy. They betrayed Russia. They've this whole time been mismanaging the invasion. They are they are why Ukraine hasn't already fallen at this point. It seems like the go-to response has been to say, actually, this was the Wagner Group and Prigozhin's fault that we haven't, defeated Ukraine a long time ago, is the perspective I've seen from Russia Today. Is that what you think they're going to be running with, like the Russian state media and Putin's side?
I don't think they can really blame the war failing on Wagner. If they were to admit that they had that much control, that would be kind of insane. It's already crazy that we have Putin on like Russian TV yelling like, yes, we gave Wagner these billions and billions and billions of dollars, when for years journalists and investigators have been trying to go through all the shell companies that Wagner works under the blanket of and like in the back rooms in the shadows. And now we have they're trying to just vaguely connect them to the Russian government, trying to improve these connections. And now Putin's out here saying, yes, we give them billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars all the time. Yes, we give the raper murderous division, we give them all the money in the world. Yes. So there's you can already see the seismic shift that's happening in politics because of that. But I don't think that message is necessarily going to connect from the word of mouth anecdotal stuff I'm being told about from the people that are still living in Russia. This is a hot button topic at work. This is a hot button topic at the dinner table. People are confused about the future of their country. Many of them are confused that if this was treason by Wagner, then why are Wagner getting away with it? Why can Prigozhin continue to operate his organization? Why is he in Belarus? And for the people who support Prigozhin, a lot of them, while angry that he didn't go further, some of them will feel even more emboldened to be more critical of Putin's regime in the future, because if Prigozhin can get away with it, then why can't they get away with it? Why can't these other people get away with it? Why can't everybody get away with it? So it's hard for me to imagine that this narrative is going to, soothe the Russian people enough. It just doesn't, it just doesn't make much sense. If it was maybe if it was completely bloodless, it would be easier, but planes were getting shot down. It's very hard to just say this, oh, some internal political dispute, yada yada. Usually when you're throwing in like a new Congress in the United States, we don't find out 20 soldiers shot dead outside by Liz Cheney's forces. That's not a thing.
Yeah, I mean, like even with Jan 6th, you know, I'd say like even with having Confederate flags fly in the capital of this country for the first time in history, that was probably less of a big deal and less of a wow. This makes the stability of our democracy look bad. I feel like Jan 6th didn't even do as much damage as this will do, because there was not like armed militia guys rolling through shooting down police helicopters. That like it's nowhere near on this. I mean, it's close, but nowhere near on the same level. That's going to be hard for Putin to just let that slide and still look strong.
I mean, the January 6th protesters took over like a few federal buildings, and of course, I think January 6th is serious, but January 6th protesters didn't take the supply lines into a major war zone, take over a military HQ command that governs an entirety of the war zone that Russia is fighting in, while marching like tanks on Moscow, directly rejecting the orders of the president too. Because this would be like January 6th, but Trump told them to leave and they didn't. And also they've taken over a major U.S. city. It's really hard to compare these things, but when it comes to the stability of Russian institutions, they've never looked more fragile. Because one of the main takeaways, if you're Vladimir Putin, is nobody stopped them. Why wasn't the FSB? Why wasn't the National Guard? Why wasn't anybody able to stop them? I mean, it gets gotten to the point where he's trying to say, congratulations to the military, you saved Russia. But all the military did was get shot at. That's all they did. They didn't stop them.
A lot of people are now realizing how easy it would be to overthrow Putin with a armed coup.
Well, I don't know if it would be easy now. It's hard to say now. Well, but it depends on like how the crackdown goes. Well, but it's a lot easier than anyone could have thought.
Yeah, like they were like, they got that far.
They got pretty far.
That's how far they were able to get, and Putin's just like letting them chill now.
If Prigozhin had more allies and he had more weight with like the Siloviki, like potentially he could have gone all the way with this.
Yeah, oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I was really sick when the height of this was going down, so I didn't get to follow it day of. By the time I was like, all right, I can sit at my computer for long enough without having to run to the toilet to vomit. I went ahead and I started like reading up on it, and it was already like past this point, you know. Prigozhin was already running off. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on it because you're way more tapped in than me. And it's been so far very fun talking with you and learning about this stuff. I mean, obviously it's pretty grim subject matter, but I also do, you know, I enjoy keeping up with these things and not being left in the dark on what's going on. I think one of the most important things you can do, especially if you have a platform, and this is what you've dedicated yourself to in the last like year and a half, is exposing and bringing light to what is happening in Ukraine and in Russia. Because the worst thing that can happen is this stuff just gets swept under the rug. Giving it the spotlight, giving these war crimes, giving the destabilization attention as much as possible is very much what we need to be doing, and I admire what you do a lot.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's important to have as many cameras in this country recording everything that's happening as possible. There's so much stories to tell. There's so many things happening here of historical significance. And I want to make sure that there is enough source material that nobody can really deny the types of things that went on here. Because you can already see like machines, like media machines and propaganda machines working into overdrive to try to change that history as we live it. And a lot of them are not even in Russia, but they're for whatever reason allied themselves with these narratives. Like, for example, Tucker Carlson, who said it was For example, the Novakhovka Dam explosion was probably the Ukrainians who said that for every Russian soldier that dies, 7 Ukrainian soldiers dies. Just these things that he just does not have evidence of. Just like these bold and like boldly wrong and like these wrong claims, these lies that he's pushing out on cable television, that he's pushing out on the most popular news show in the United States. And there has to be good source material to push back against these claims. Then there has to be people to gather that source material. And I would hope that in my time here, I focus on a lot more of the human elements than, say, the super corporate friendly, like 5-second news bulletin of just a bunch of soldiers running around shooting at stuff, but trying to focus on maybe more the humanitarian side of it or the personal side of the war, which I think a lot of the more mainstream publications can't do because they have to, you know, plug Tampax commercials, and taking 30 minutes to talk to somebody is not
you got to throw in the Arby's ad.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and you do a really good job of humanizing it, because mainstream media outlets cover this stuff, and it's like, this army moved into this town that you've never heard of before in a different language, and then also this force that you've probably never heard of took this many losses, and it's just numbers. It's just, like, to a lot of people, it's just words. It just flies over their head. There is no emotional attachment to that to actually motivate them to care. A lot of the time, it's just politics, words, politics, dry. But what you're doing is actively on the ground showing what it is like for the people in Ukraine who are having their entire lives flipped upside down by the Russian regime. And not only that, but there's been some other pretty great channels as well. I'm sure you're familiar with her. But during the start of the war, when everybody was doing like hardcore coverage of everything, before it was very quickly realized this is not going to be resolved or ended anytime soon, there's this woman who was in a shelter with her family, with her I believe 2 kids, and her husband was in. It's been a while. I don't even know if there's actively fighting happening there right now. But her husband was out fighting, like, you know, on the other side of the country. And she was uploading like 2 videos a day, one at night and one in the morning, like, hey, it's nighttime, listen to the bombs, you know, like we're all here in this underground I think it was like a subway or a station or something. You know, just trying to stay away from artillery fire, you know, getting bombed. And videos like that where it's just, this is the lives of people that are just like you who are living through this. The actual emotional attachment along with the hard numbers and data, which are important, of course, the you know, the troop movements and the dry stuff that doesn't really have anything to latch on to emotionally is important to know. But those one-on-one interactions, those stories that they're anecdotes. They matter. They do matter a lot, and it matters a lot.
Some of the most important journalism in any war is the human interest stories. It's the stories that kind of show like the culture or like standard of living or day-to-day experiences of people on the ground, or their personal experiences or their personal stories. It'd be very bad if historically all we knew was just like casualty numbers and like battle graphs and like this building was taken here and this building was taken here and then this building was blown up. That would be a very bad way in showing the reality of war, because war is also has a very human side to it. It was part of the importance of a lot of the Vietnam War coverage on the ground, showing the reality of the fighting, the human interest side, or any of the wars that you know the media has done a good job, and the media usually does a good job when it shows the personal effects of the war and the conflict and the death on everyday people and their personal stories. Because that's the way you're going to get people, I think, interested. Because people are working their 9 to 5, their daily lives. And if you take them from their office job, put them in front of the TV, and then give them just a long, boring history lesson with a bunch of graphs and battle data, it's not a good way to engage people about the importance of the humanity of these stories.
Yeah, you need something to get people attached to, a story that actually gets people emotionally invested, because just so many people want to turn their brains off of this kind of thing. They feel like just thinking about it is scary to them, and the idea of learning about it is sometimes they just find it boring, and sometimes they're just like, no, it's too stressful, it's too scary for me to engage with, and that kind of upsets me. I won't say it kind of upsets me, it just really does upset me, because this matters a lot, not just to the, obviously it affects us here in America, but you watch these videos or you hear about like the massacres that are committed, and it's like, no, people need to care about this. They do. They really need to care about this. And I was actually going to ask you, because you talked about how you know some people that are still in Russia, and give you some perspective on what it's like to live there right now. I was curious if you've interviewed a YouTuber named No Fuckers, NFKRZ.
No, I haven't interviewed him, but I'm familiar with him.
Oh, do you have plans to interview him?
No, I don't have plans to interview him. I've never talked to him. I've never met him.
I feel like a lot of people would love that, because he's been making a lot of content about like not being a big fan of the war at all, and not liking what it's like to live in Russia. But I think he's currently living in Croatia. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd also like an interview with Zelensky, probably Obama as well.
That'd be awesome.
PewDiePie, the Queen, post-mortem. I have a lot of...
I feel like you could get a... I feel like you could get a few of those interviews, though.
The Obama
I feel like
one?
you could get... I think you'll get an interview with Obama.
An Obama interview.
Yeah, I think
I don't think I can. I don't think I look. I think the lowest level interviewer I saw do it, I think was what was that guy? What was that Indian guy who hosted a show kind of like John Oliver's? Hassan Minhaj, I think was his name.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, Hassan Minhaj is the lowest, I guess the least popular interviewer that I know of that can probably land an interview with Obama. I can't think of, I don't know how we get an interview with Barack Obama.
I don't know, maybe. I feel like it could happen.
Why? Why would Obama talk to me?
I feel like I feel like if the Democratic Party is smart, it wants to try to appeal to Gen Z, and I feel like speaking with somebody like you would be good.
Dylan Burns,
I don't know.
I want to come on hippy dippy and debate CTV.
History and politics.
I need to debate CTV, Mr. Dylan Burns. Yeah, I don't know.
I feel like I feel like you've got your roots in like the hardcore real politics enough that I feel like you could build the bridges necessary to maybe not like hardcore interview Obama, but to meet him.
But to meet Obama, I don't know. Maybe I could. I think the furthest I could get maybe is like one of those like telecasts where he talks to like 1,000 people in a room at once.
He does like a Twitter space.
Yeah, like a Twitter space or something. Like no, they do this thing where like people can donate to go to these events online where like politicians speak to like 1,000 people, and they call it like, wow, an event with donors or supporters, but there's like 1,000 people in a Zoom call.
Yeah, that would obviously be the easiest way, but I don't know. Like after AOC playing Among Us, which is a special case, and I don't know. It feels like the Republican Party has not been afraid of modernizing itself and adapting to this like internet era of culture war politics online, basically shaping everything it's talked about in real world politics. Like the word woke was something that was just said by random grifter chuds for years before it started becoming the big boogeyman word that everybody talks about now on the right. It feels like the Democratic Party has to catch up to that eventually. And, I feel like public figures online are going to be seen at some point, maybe not like soon or super soon, but at some point near the same level at least as of worthy of reaching out to and having a dialogue with as somebody like John Oliver or some like mainstream liberal like on live TV politics / comedy edutainment creator. I feel like that kind of thing is gonna happen at some point.
Look, if the Xanderhal show reschedules with me last second, then I don't know how I'm gonna get Obama to actually sit down for an interview.
I was sick. I was not feeling good, unironically, but like no, I do genuinely think you. Sorry, I do genuinely think that you will be able to get some surprising conversations at some point. You've achieved a lot, and I don't think you should play yourself down. I think if you aim high, then you can only miss high. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. Okay, I want to interview Prigozhin. I want to start the. I'm gonna start the. I'm gonna start a new chapter of Wagner.
I feel like you could reform it.
Yeah.
You could get I feel like you could box Prigozhin and absolutely beat him with the terms of if you win, you get to own the Wagner Group, and of course all of their out of state income and all of the fingers they have, all the pies they have their fingers in. I feel like that would be good terms. You box him, beat his ass, win the Wagner Group, and then reform it.
Yeah, I'm gonna make the Wagner Group woke. I'm gonna make it woke.
They them Wagner Group.
Yeah, I'm gonna
No.
I'm gonna be the they them leader of the Wagner Group. Instead of using like big sledgehammers, we're gonna use like maybe smaller wooden kitchen mallets. See, that's reform.
Hell yeah. That's improvement.
That
you
is
can't
improvement.
argue against that. You can't say that's a bad change. No, but in all seriousness, this has been a good conversation. I feel like I've been a lot more informed on this than I was before, and it's been really nice to get an on the ground perspective. For everybody in chat who wants a little bit of an idea of how dedicated Dylan is to this, I hosted him the other day, and he was going over the video footage he got of getting war crime by Russia, and he said he swears a few times in the footage where he almost dies. And on stream, he says, "I'm sorry about the swearing. I try to cut down on that kind of thing because this type of footage could be used as evidence. You know, like it's important video footage. It could be historically relevant." And it's like, you are very dedicated to this. That you're like, sorry, I was swearing when I almost died. This footage needs to be able to be used for you know, to hold Russia accountable and for historical context.
Look,
that is some serious dedication.
It'd really suck if the only way I ever existed in a history book was just me yelling cocksucker or something.
Yeah, that's definitely understandable.
Then again, that is also a decent legacy too, but I'd rather that not be the legacy.
Yeah, there was we can finish up on this. I don't know if you've probably seen this YouTube channel. It's called Civdiv.
Yeah.
He's a guy who posts a lot of footage of like his buddies GoPro video fighting as volunteer fighters in Ukraine. And one of them I watched, this team of volunteer fighters, and I'm sure some Ukrainian soldiers mixed in, end up killing an entire team of Russian Spetsnaz that were like holed up in this you know, very classic Soviet era looking concrete block of a building, and the guy like throws a grenade in there and it blows up, and he says, the guy who's got the GoPro on, "Those fucking retards."
There's a lot of cussing in these videos. If you look in a lot of these videos, there's a lot of dropping the F slur, the R slur, a lot of cussing in these videos, a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, understandably so. But when
I'm not killing
like,
anybody. I don't got no excuse.
Well, almost dying is a pretty good excuse, but like the fact that you're so dedicated to ensuring that, you know, like I want to control that instinct to like say, oh shit, you know, as running for cover, right? So that this footage can be like, because this footage has a greater, you know, value. If I go about it, it just that you saying that kind of struck me in a certain way that was like, respect for that. Respect for that. A lot of respect.
There's two ways I can go about reporting, and there's in some stories I want to be very much involved, as in I feel like if I'm going to be covering like a refugee aid center, I feel like I would like to contribute in some way, so I have a better understanding of like how the process works, so I can explain it to the audience, right? But in another environment, sometimes you should be like National Geographic, where you should kind of not really even know much about the cameraman, and in scenarios like that, at least temporarily, you should not know much about the cameraman unless it's like a retrospective about the footage after it's been published.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's definitely a good thing. And I'm glad to see that you're you're okay and that you're doing with your platform such a good thing. Like it's I can proudly say that like I'm proud to say that I'm friends with you. You know, you're doing amazing things, and I mean that very sincerely.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Xander. Hey,
Yeah.
I do want you to know though, okay? I still will never ever, no matter how many times I get shot at over here, I'll never take back kicking you from that debate panel, okay? I'm still as brutal and
Yeah.
cruel as ever.
Vince McMahon of the Twitch debate
Yeah,
sphere.
I'm still as brutal and cruel, okay? You don't get too friendly of an opinion of me. I'm still a backstabbing snake.
I'll keep that in mind.
Thank you.
No, but in all seriousness though, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really good combo.
Awesome, man.
Do you want to go ahead and let everyone know where to find you?
Sure, you can find me at CIA.gov, NSA.gov, or what's the last one? Oh, ATF.gov. Or if you want,
Oh, and Department of Homeland Security.
No. I harassed people there and I got fired. It was very bad. Yeah, I have a restraining order. But you can also find me at DylanBurns.tv. That's my website if you want to be watching my streams. I just like a normal DG. It's like a normal .gg site. Also on YouTube, Dylan Burns TV, Dylan Burns Live for my second channel for my streamer stuff, and Dylan Burns 1776 on Twitter, Dylan Burns TV on Instagram.
Hell yeah. I highly recommend you follow Dylan Burns' Twitter. Like, regardless of whether or not like you want to see his content, you should be following him on Twitter. The updates on the war in Ukraine, the foreign policy stuff is always top tier. Okay, you should definitely be following Dylan on Twitter. Like, if anything else, Twitter is going to be the best place to definitely like get some pretty good tweets. I enjoy your Twitter feed a lot.
Yeah, but you can also visit me on platforms that give me money too. You can also do that.
Yeah. But just to the people who are like, nah, I'm not gonna follow on Twitch. I'm not gonna sub on YouTube. I'm an exception to that. You know, you should at the very least follow that Twitter because you're pretty based on Twitter. You got some good stuff there. But yeah, it's been really fun having you on. I hope you have a great day, dude.
Thank you. You too. You have a good one. Bye bye.
Yeah, have a good one.